In this video, we'll discuss the use of the Diagnodent Pen. This is a caries detection device that helps us identify caries in areas that are particularly difficult to diagnose with an explorer, such as pit and fissures, but it's also capable of detecting caries on smooth surfaces. It does this through the principle of laser fluorescence. It's meant to be a complementary device to a visual and explorer examination, and it's not meant to be used as the sole means of caries determination. It's a class 1 diode laser at 655 nanometers, which means that it makes no changes to the tissue it comes in contact with, so it's safe to use with the naked eye, and that's including with your dental loupes. So protective eyewear isn't necessary to use this device. But that said, you certainly wouldn't want to look directly into the tip of it. So don't shine the laser directly into your eyes or into your loupes. The laser in the Diagnodent is a bidirectional laser. Most lasers work only in one direction as they shine a laser light on a subject. The Diagnodent will allow light to come back into it in the form of a fluorescence that happens when the laser hits a carious surface. This fluorescence occurs when the laser hits the porphyrins that are produced during the carious process. The more caries, the more porphyrins, the more porphyrins, the more fluorescence, and in this way the Diagnodent measures the magnitude of the caries. It can provide us with both a quantitative and a qualitative caries assessment. Let's look at the parts of the Diagnodent system. This is the Diagnodent handpiece itself. This is the laser emitting instrument that will assess for caries. There's a display down at the lower part of the handle, and that's where the measurement values will be displayed. This button up at the top, this is the on-off button. Press it for about 1 second, and you'll hear a beep, and the device will turn on. This is the Save Enter button, and it's kind of the equivalent of the Enter button on your computer. Most of these buttons you typically won't need to use. This is the Menu button, and that's going to allow you to scroll through and adjust the features of the Diagnodent. There's 4 functions available in the menu. The first one is the calibration. The second one is the channel, which you really won't need to use. Third one is for the volume. And then the fourth one is for pairing the device with the remote desktop display. The only function that you'll likely need to use is the calibration, and I'll talk more about that shortly. The control that you'll use the most while using the Diagnodent is this black ring called the ring switch. You'll squeeze the ring switch to reset the values to 0 after each area that you scan. You'll also notice that there are these ridges in the ring switch. Switch works much easier if you squeeze on the ridges and not in the depressions. On the underside of the handpiece, at the end you'll find a hole. This is where the laser emitting tip gets inserted. You want to be careful that no debris gets in here. The black portion on the underside of the handpiece is a sleeve that covers the battery compartment. If you need to replace the battery, slide the black sleeve forward to expose the battery compartment. This handpiece uses a standard AA battery. This is the base. This is the remote digital display and support stand for the Diagnodent Pen, and it does not charge the device. All of the measurements that you find on the pen display will also show up on the remote display if you have the two paired. To turn on the remote display, press the button on the back of the unit. You'll hear it beep when it turns on. When the unit turns on, you'll see a display that looks like this. If you don't see numbers showing up on the display, it means the base and the pen are not paired. If they're not paired, press the menu button on the handpiece 4 times until you see this menu. Then press either the plus or minus buttons to activate the pairing. If you need to replace the batteries in the remote display, Separate the display from the base by sliding it out to the side. You'll find the battery compartment on the underside, and the unit uses 4 AA batteries. To conserve power, both the pen and the display will turn themselves off after about 90 seconds. The sterilization box contains the laser emitting tips and the calibration disc. Let's take a closer look at this box. The sterilization box should have 2 blue ringed tips, and there's no difference between the two. These tips are designed for pits, fissures, and smooth surfaces. This yellow thing right in the middle is what's called a calibration disc. I'll talk more about that when we get to the calibration of the instrument. The tip will go into the end of the Diagnodent, and it's this clear little end here that's the working part of this tip. This looks like a little sliver of glass, and it looks pretty fragile, but this is made out of sapphire. I've been told by Cavo that they have never seen one of these break under routine use. They have seen them break when the Diagnodent is abused, such as dropping it, so be careful. Since the only way one will break is from abuse, if you do break one, the school will charge you for its replacement, which runs about $175 at the time of this recording. So let's get our Diagnodent ready to be used in clinic. We want to cover it up for infection control. There are barrier sleeves that are designed specifically for the Diagnodent, but let's assume that we're all out of them and you need to make do with what we have readily available. Use the same barrier that you would use for covering your air water syringe in clinic, and snip just a couple of millimeters off of one of the corners. Don't make the cut too big. It needs to be smaller than the diameter of the sapphire tip. If you make it too big, the sleeve won't stay on the Diagnodent. Slide the handpiece into the sleeve and line up the little hole in the sleeve with the hole in the end of the handpiece as close as you can. Then slide the sapphire tip into the hole in the sleeve and then into the hole at the end of the handpiece. Be careful not to get any of the barrier plastic trapped between the sapphire tip and the opening in the handpiece. As long as you didn't make the corner cut of the sleeve too big, sapphire tip will hold the barrier in place. To keep the handpiece from sliding around inside the sleeve, remove the adhesive strip, fold the excess over the back of the Diagnodent, and secure it into place. Before we use the Diagnodent, we need to make sure that this is properly calibrated. In the middle of the sapphire tip holder, you'll find the yellow ceramic calibration disc. If you look close at it, you'll see the number 77 on either side of a small depression in the center of the disc. The calibration disc is designed to fluoresce a standardized amount when the Diagnodent tip is placed on it. So let's check the current level of accuracy first. Let's set the handpiece to 0 by squeezing the black ring, and then place the sapphire tip in the center of that ceramic disc. What we want to see is a measurement on the handpiece that's within 3 points plus or minus of the disc. While you're doing this, you also need to make sure that you're holding the tip away from any direct lighting sources, because this is going to alter the process. So you can see at 77 we're pretty close, but let's go ahead and calibrate it anyway to show you how to do it. The way we calibrate it is to press the menu button once, and we should see the calibration icon in the upper left of the display. Press the Save Enter button once and wait until you hear a continuous tone. This tone will last for about 7 seconds, and make sure you get the tip of the Diagnodent in the center of the disc and hold it there until the tone stops. When it stops, calibration's complete, and the number registered on the display should match the number on the ceramic calibration disc. If it doesn't, repeat the process. Once it's calibrated, reset the peak to 0, and you're ready to start using this for your patient. Now let's demonstrate how to measure caries on an extracted tooth. First, a couple things you need to know about the display. You see these larger numbers here labeled peak and the smaller numbers labeled moment. Moment means a direct real-time measurement. The peak is the highest recording. Now we're going to take some sample teeth and measure any caries that are present. Now remember what I said at the beginning, that this instrument works by measuring fluorescence. It records the fluorescence that's reflected back from the tooth. So also recall from your dental anatomy and aesthetic courses that enamel itself fluoresces. Each patient's enamel fluoresces uniquely to them. So we need to set a baseline to standardize the Diagnodent. This will compensate for each patient's unique level of fluorescence. To standardize it, place the Diagnodent against an area of intact enamel and squeeze the ring switch. The ring switch has multiple functions. In this case, squeeze it and hold it for at least 1 full second, and you'll hear 3 beeps, which will mean the Diagnodent has been standardized to the patient's own enamel. In other words, we've established our baseline fluorescence. If you look at the display, you'll see that it flashed set 0. And now we have the instrument standardized to the patient's own enamel. So we'll take this relatively intact tooth. Okay, we can see some deeper grooves, we can see some stain. Let's reset our Diagnodent, and we're going to place the tip down in the grooves. And notice how I move the Diagnodent around. I don't just shine it in one place. I want to make sure I shine it as many locations as I can. And you can see how we hit that one spot just a little bit buckled to the central pit. And we got a much higher reading. So that peak number will stay there until I reset the unit back to 0. So what do these numbers generally mean? So values in the range of 0 to 15 typically mean that it's a healthy tooth. 16 to 20 might indicate early enamel caries. 21 to 30 would indicate deep enamel caries. And values that are greater than 30 would tend to indicate caries into the dentin. So when we're done using this, we need to disassemble it. Twist the laser emitting tip straight out without torquing it, because we don't want to break the sapphire tip. If there's any plastic barrier that's accumulated on the end of it, make sure you clean that off. We don't want to sterilize this with any residual plastic on it. That will ruin the tip. Do not assume that the sterilization department will take care of this for you. They will miss something like that because this is a very small, specialized item that they generally don't deal with on a regular basis. It's your responsibility to make sure that there's no debris on this, not theirs. I find the easiest way to remove the barrier is make a little snip on the side of the barrier with your scissors, tear off the end, and slide the handpiece out. So let's talk about some of the do's and don'ts of using the Diagnodent. It's a very good instrument that can help both qualify and quantify caries, but it can't be used under all circumstances. Where it works the best is in the deep pits and fissures, and it can be used around the margins of amalgams. It can also be used on smooth surfaces where you've found a suspect area of demineralized or dysmineralized enamel. It can't be used around composites because most composites will fluoresce, giving a false positive. For the same reason, you can't use it to detect caries under an existing sealant. Sealants must be removed in their entirety before using the Diagnodent. Any remnants of sealant left in a groove could give you a false positive. It can't be used crowns for a number of reasons. Many porcelains will fluoresce, giving a false positive, and the bonding and luting agents that we use for all crowns, those can also fluoresce. You can't use it to detect caries excavation in one of your preps, because the closer you get to the pulp, the greater risk of getting fluorescence from the pulp itself, which would cause you to prep too deeply. Plaque, calculus, other debris can also fluoresce, so you need to make sure the teeth are clean before you use this. In fact, Cavo makes a longer sapphire tip that's designed to extend into a periodontal pocket and detect calculus. So with that tip, you could use that as an aid in your scaling and root planings, but this is not a tip that's available at the school. Residue from some prophy paste will also fluoresce, so use the Diagnodent after scaling but before a polishing. If you have polished, make sure that you're very, very diligent in rinsing off any excess polishing paste, especially from the pits and fissures. So that's the Diagnodent. We encourage you to use it in clinic. If you need any help, don't hesitate to contact any faculty member that's familiar with the instrument, or you can refer back to this video.